I thought the worst part of having a bus crush my leg was the physical pain, until my ultra rich wife looked me in the eye and said, I married a man, not a liability. She didn't just leave me broken and bleeding, she spread lies about me faking the injury while I could barely walk to the bathroom. What she didn't know was that the settlement check sitting in my account would change everything, and the successful business I was quietly building would soon have her entire social circle talking. 6 months later, when she saw me step out of my BMW at the city's most exclusive charity gala, with another woman on my arm, the look of shock and regret on her face was worth every moment of pain she'd put me through. But the real surprise came when her mother showed up at my shop, desperately trying to buy back what Claire had thrown away. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that subscribe button and tell me where you're watching from, because this journey from rock bottom to quiet victory is just getting started. The morning air at the city bus garage still held that crisp October bite. I pulled my jacket tighter as I walked toward Bay 7, where the old 4200 series waited for maintenance. My name is Marcus Reed, and I've been working on buses for 8 years. There's something honest about this work. Your hands get dirty, your back aches, but at the end of the day, you know you've done something that matters. People depend on these buses to get to work, to see family, to live their lives. Marcus, Ray Porter called out from across the garage floor. You ready for this beast? I grinned and grabbed my tools. Ray's been my best friend since my first day here. He's the kind of guy who remembers your birthday and loans you 20 bucks without asking when you'll pay it back. We've worked on thousands of buses together, and we have a rhythm that makes the hardest jobs feel easier. Let's get her done, I said, walking over to where Ray was setting up the hydraulic lift. The bus looked tired. These older models always do after years of city routes, stop after stop, carrying people through their daily struggles. I ran my hand along the undercarriage, checking for obvious problems before we lifted her up. Supervisor says they need this one back on the road by noon, Ray said, shaking his head. Rush job. I nodded, but something felt off. The lift mechanism made a small grinding sound as Ray started it up. I've heard that sound before. It's the kind of thing that usually means trouble. Hey Ray, hold up, I said, putting my hand on the control. You hear that grinding? Ray paused and listened. The lift shuddered slightly, just a tiny movement, but enough to make me nervous. Yeah, I hear it. Should we check it out? Before I could answer, Supervisor Jenkins appeared beside us, clipboard in hand and stress written across his face. Reed, Porter, what's the holdup? This bus needs to be road ready in 2 hours. The lift's making some noise, I said. Might want to have maintenance take a look. Jenkins glanced at his watch and frowned. We'll log it later. Right now, I need this bus fixed. The afternoon routes are already behind because of the one that broke down yesterday. Ray and I exchanged a look. We both knew that log it later often meant forget about it until something bad happens. But Jenkins was already walking away, and we had work to do. Your call, Marcus, Ray said quietly. I stared at the lift controls. 8 years of experience told me to stop, but 8 years of experience also told me that sometimes you have to take calculated risks to get the job done. The grinding sound was small. Maybe it was nothing. Let's do it, I said, but slow and careful. Ray nodded and started the lift again. The bus rose smoothly at first, 6 inches, 12 inches, 18. I was starting to think we'd worried about nothing when I heard a sharp crack from inside the lift mechanism. Everything happened in seconds, but it felt like slow motion. The lift lurched, dropping the bus about 4 inches before the safety catches tried to engage. But 4 inches was enough. My left leg was directly under the rear axle housing when it came down. The pain was instant and incredible. Not just pain, it was like my whole world collapsed into that one moment of crushing metal and bone. I heard myself scream, but it sounded far away, like someone else's voice. Marcus! Ray's voice cut through everything. Oh God, somebody help! I could hear shouting from across the garage, tools clattering as people dropped everything and ran toward us. Someone was calling 911. Someone else was trying to figure out how to get the bus off my leg without making things worse. The pain made it hard to think, but I could feel my phone in my pocket. Claire. I needed to call Claire. She would know what to do. She always knew what to do. Ray was kneeling beside me, his face pale and scared. Hang on, buddy. Help's coming. Just hang on. My phone, I gasped. Call Claire. Ray fumbled for my phone and dialed her number. I could hear it ringing once, twice, 3 times. Then, voicemail. Claire's professional voice saying she couldn't take the call right now. She didn't answer, Ray said, but he tried again. The paramedics arrived in what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes. They were efficient and calm, asking questions about how it happened, how long I'd been trapped, what my pain level was on a scale of 1 to 10. 15, I said through gritted teeth, and one of them actually smiled. We're going to get you out of here, she said. Try to stay still. They worked with the garage crew to carefully lift the bus just enough to free my leg. When they moved me onto the stretcher, the pain was so intense that my vision went white around the edges. But I could still think about Claire. Why hadn't she answered? As they loaded me into the ambulance, I saw Ray, holding my phone, still trying to reach my wife. Please pick up, I whispered, not sure if I was talking to Ray or to Claire or to God. The ambulance ride was a blur of sirens and medical talk I didn't understand. The paramedic kept asking me questions to keep me conscious. Where did I work? How long had I been married? Did I have any allergies? My wife, I kept saying. Has anyone reached my wife? We'll keep trying, the paramedic said, but her voice had that careful tone that medical people use when they don't want to make promises. The hospital emergency room was bright white chaos. Nurses rushing around, machines beeping, someone calling for x-rays. They cut off my work pants, and I felt embarrassed about how dirty my socks were. Stupid thing to worry about when your leg might be broken, but your mind goes to weird places when you're in shock. Ray showed up about 20 minutes later, out of breath and carrying my wallet. I called Claire again, he said. Still no answer, but I left messages. A doctor appeared beside my bed. She was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and steady hands that carefully examined my leg. Mr. Reed, I'm Dr. Patterson. We're going to take you for some x-rays in a few minutes, but I can already tell you're looking at surgery and a long recovery. The fracture is significant, and there's soft tissue damage as well. How long? I asked. Hard to say exactly until we see the x-rays, but you'll be off your feet for several months at minimum. Physical therapy after that. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. Several months. The words hit me like a second accident. I was the main income in our house. Claire made good money at her family's company, but we lived in her world, with her expenses. What would this mean for us? Marcus, I heard Claire's voice and looked up to see her standing at the edge of the treatment area. She was wearing her navy business coat, the expensive one, and her hair was perfect. Despite rushing to the hospital, she looked beautiful and completely out of place in the chaos of the ER. Claire, I said, relief flooding through me. I've been trying to call you. She walked over to the bed, her heels clicking on the floor. I was in back-to-back meetings. I came as soon as I got the messages. I reached for her hand, needing that connection, that touch that said we were in this together. She gave me her fingers, but they felt stiff and cold. Her eyes kept scanning the room, taking in the medical equipment, the other patients, the general messiness of emergency medicine. What did the doctors say? She asked. Dr. Patterson stepped forward. Mrs. Reed, Your husband has a severe fracture of the tibia and fibula, plus significant soft tissue damage. He's going to need surgery today, and then months of recovery. He won't be able to work for quite some time. Claire's face went very still. I knew that look. It was the same expression she got when someone told her about a problem at work, a kind of controlled panic that she tried to hide behind professionalism. Months, she repeated. It could be 6 months or more before he's back to full capacity, Dr. Patterson said. Every case is different, but this was a significant trauma. Claire's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it automatically. Then she caught herself and put it away, but not before I saw the irritation flash across her face. I'm going to step outside and make some calls, she said. Let people know what happened. She leaned down and kissed my forehead, but it felt mechanical, like something she was supposed to do rather than something she wanted to do. After she left, Ray pulled a chair closer to my bed. How you holding up, man? Scared, I admitted. Not just about the leg, about everything. What if I can't work the same way? What if this changes everything? One thing at a time, Ray said. First you get better. Everything else can wait. But even as he said, it, I could hear Claire's voice in the hallway, and her tone was sharp with frustration. I couldn't make out the words, but I could hear the edge in her voice. The edge that usually meant someone was about to get blamed for something. This can't be happening right now, I heard her say clearly. Right now. Like there would be a better time for me to get hurt. Like I had chosen this moment to mess up her schedule. Ray heard it too. I could tell by the way his jaw tightened and his eyes got hard. Maybe she's just stressed, I said, but even I didn't believe it. Maybe, Ray said, but his voice said he didn't believe it either. They took me to surgery that evening. Claire was there when they wheeled me away, standing at the foot of my bed with her arms crossed. She looked tired and frustrated, like she'd been dealing with a difficult client all day. I'll be here when you wake up, she said. But when I woke up hours later, groggy and in pain, the chair beside my bed was empty. Nurse told me Claire had left around midnight, saying she needed to get some rest for an important meeting in the morning. The next day started with rain tapping against my hospital room window. Everything hurt, not just my leg, but my whole body felt like it had been hit by a truck. The pain medication made my thoughts fuzzy, but it couldn't touch the growing fear in my chest. Claire arrived around noon with an expensive flower arrangement that looked like it came from the hospital gift shop. The kind of flowers you buy when you're supposed to bring flowers, not because you want to brighten someone's day. How are you feeling? She asked, setting the flowers on the windowsill. Like I got hit by a bus, I said, trying to smile. She didn't smile back. Instead, she pulled out her phone and frowned at the screen. Sorry, work is crazy right now. With the quarterly reports due and the board meeting next week, everything's falling apart. Before I could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, and her face got that tight, controlled look again. I have to take this, she said, then answered without moving away from my bed. Hi, Mother. Doris Ashford's voice came through the speaker clearly, sharp and impatient. Claire, darling, how soon can this situation be handled? The Mackenzies are asking questions, and I don't want this reflecting poorly on the family. Claire glanced at me, then at the phone. She didn't correct her mother or explain that I was lying right there, listening to every word. It's complicated, Mother. The doctors say months of recovery. Months? Doris's voice rose. That's unacceptable. Surely there are ways to expedite these things. Private doctors, better facilities. We can't have this dragging on. I heard the word liability float through the conversation, though it was muffled. Claire was holding the phone closer to her ear now, trying to keep me from hearing. But I heard enough. Ray showed up just as Claire was finishing the call. He brought real food, a sandwich from the deli near the garage, and he charged my phone without being asked. He also called Mrs. Brooks, my neighbor, and arranged for her to keep an eye on the house. The guys at work are asking about you, Ray said, sending their best. Claire barely acknowledged Ray's presence. She was back to scrolling through her phone, dealing with whatever crisis couldn't wait for her husband to get out of the hospital. I have to go, she said suddenly. Board emergency, but I'll be back tomorrow. She leaned down and kissed my forehead again. That same dutiful kiss that felt like a chore being completed. After she left, Ray and I sat in silence for a while. Finally, he spoke up. Marcus, man, I don't want to step out of line, but my wife is acting like this is all an inconvenience. I finished. Ray didn't deny it. Maybe she's just scared. Some people handle fear by getting angry or distant. I wanted to believe that. I needed to believe that. But lying there in that hospital bed, staring at my wedding ring under the harsh fluorescent lights, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed in those few seconds when the bus came down. I'm going to fix this, I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was talking about my leg or my marriage. The next morning, they discharged me with a wheelchair, crutches, and a list of instructions that made my future look like a mountain I'd never be able to climb. No weight on the leg for at least 8 weeks. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Follow-up appointments every 2 weeks. Pain medication that made me feel disconnected from my own life. Ray drove me home in his pickup truck, carefully helping me navigate the steps to my front door. The house looked the same, but it felt different, smaller somehow, more challenging. Claire was already there, packing a suitcase on our bed. What's that for? I asked, though part of me already knew. I'm staying organized, she said, without looking up, getting what I need so I don't have to keep running back and forth. Mrs. Brooks appeared at the front door with a casserole dish and a stern expression. Lillian Brooks was 67 years old and had been our neighbor for 3 years. She was the kind of woman who brought you soup when you were sick and told you the truth when you didn't want to hear it. How are you feeling, honey? She asked me, but her eyes were on Claire, watching the way my wife packed like she was leaving for a business trip instead of caring for her injured husband. I'm managing, I said. Mrs. Brooks set the casserole on the kitchen counter and gave Claire a look that could have frozen water. Marcus is going to need a lot of help over the next few weeks, Mrs. Brooks said. Recovery from this kind of injury is no joke. Of course, Claire said, but her tone was distracted. We'll figure it out. Claire then laid out what she called ground rules. No loud music or TV that might disturb her work calls. No having Ray or other guys from work over too often because it looked unprofessional. And most importantly, no looking helpless in front of people because it reflected poorly on both of us. That first night home was the worst night of my life, not just because of the physical pain, though that was incredible, but because of the humiliation. I couldn't get to the bathroom without help. I couldn't reach things in the kitchen. I couldn't even get comfortable in my own bed. Claire helped when I asked, but every task felt like an imposition. When I needed help getting to the bathroom at 2 a.m., she sighed before getting up. When I dropped my pain pills and couldn't bend down to get them, she picked them up with the kind of tight-lipped patience you'd show a clumsy child. Around 3 a.m., after I'd finally managed to get semi-comfortable, I asked Claire to sit with me for a few minutes. The pain was bad, but the loneliness was worse. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed, still in her silk pajamas that probably cost more than I made in a week. I can't do this every night, Marcus, she said quietly. I have to work tomorrow, and I need my sleep. Then she turned and walked to the guest bedroom, closing the door behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than a slammed door. I lay there in the dark, listening to the house settle around me, and realized that my real recovery had nothing to do with my leg. The thing that was really broken was going to be much harder to heal. A few hours later, as dawn started to creep through the bedroom windows, I heard movement downstairs, the unmistakable sound of wheels rolling across the hardwood floor. suitcase wheels. My heart started racing, and I struggled to get out of bed. By the time I made it to the top of the stairs, using the wall for support, Claire was dressed like she was going to a board meeting. Professional, blazer, perfect hair, expensive heels. She had two suitcases by the front door. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice coming out smaller than I intended. Claire looked up at me standing at the top of the stairs, and for a moment, her mask slipped. I saw something that might have been guilt flash across her face, but then it hardened into something else, something cold and final. "I married a man, Marcus, not a liability. I didn't sign up for broken." The words hit me harder than the bus had. I gripped the banister to keep from falling down the stairs. "I'll send someone to help you," she continued, her voice taking on that professional tone she used in business meetings. "A nurse or aide, someone qualified." Her phone rang and she answered it immediately. "Yes, mother, I'm coming home now. You're right. I'm finally coming back to my senses." I heard Doris Ashford's voice through the phone, pleased and satisfied. "Good girl. You can't let sentiment cloud your judgment. Forever." Claire grabbed her car keys from the hall table and walked toward the front door. She paused only long enough to take down a framed photo of our wedding day, slipping it into her purse. I tried to follow her, to get down those stairs somehow and make her listen, but I couldn't manage it. I was trapped at the top of the stairs in my own house, watching my wife leave me. "Claire, please," I called out, "don't do this." She didn't look back. The front door closed with a sound that echoed through the empty house. I heard her car start in the driveway, then the sound of tires on asphalt as she drove away. I tried to get down the stairs to follow her, but my leg gave out and I fell, catching myself on the banister but ending up sitting on the steps, helpless and alone. That's when Mrs. Brooks burst through the front door, her face fierce with anger. "That's selfish, heartless," she started, then saw me sitting on the stairs and her expression immediately shifted to concern. "Oh, honey, come on. Let's get you back to bed." She helped me to the couch instead, wrapping a blanket around my shoulders while I tried to process what had just happened. "She left me," I said out loud, as if saying it would make it feel real. Mrs. Brooks sat beside me on the couch, and for the first time since the accident, I let myself cry. Not from the physical pain, but from the devastating realization that the woman I'd loved and married had walked away the moment I became inconvenient. "I'm here," Mrs. Brooks said simply, "and Ray's coming over before his shift. You're not alone, Marcus. That woman might have left, but you are not alone." Outside, the morning sun was coming up on a world that looked exactly the same as it had the day before. But inside this house, everything had changed forever, and I knew that learning to walk again was going to be the easy part of my recovery. The hard part was going to be learning to live with the truth about who Claire really was and who I was going to have to become now that I was on my own. The first week after Claire left was like drowning in slow motion. Every morning, I woke up expecting to hear her voice in the kitchen or the sound of her heels on the hardwood floor. Instead, I got silence and the smell of Mrs. Brooks's cooking drifting through the windows. Ray came by every morning before his shift and every evening after work. He never asked how I was feeling because he could see it written all over my face. Instead, he just showed up with groceries, helped me with things I couldn't manage, and pretended like it was normal for a grown man to need help opening a jar of peanut butter. "You hear anything from her?" he asked on day 4 while helping me sort through the mail that had piled up. "Nothing," I said, like I never existed. Ray's jaw tightened. He'd been holding back his real thoughts about Claire since the day she left, but I could see the anger building behind his eyes. "Marcus, I got to tell you something," he said, sitting down at my kitchen table. "Some of the guys at work have been hearing things." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "People talking, saying you're milking the injury, saying you're trying to get money out of the company." Ray's voice was carefully controlled, like he was trying not to explode. Word is, someone's been spreading stories about how you were planning this whole thing. I stared at him. Planning what? Getting my leg crushed? I know it's crazy, but the stories are getting around. Someone's saying you knew the lift was broken and used it anyway so you could sue. The room felt like it was spinning. Not only had Claire abandoned me, but someone was actively trying to destroy what was left of my reputation. Who's saying this stuff? Ray hesitated. I heard it came from someone connected to Claire's family, someone who knows people at the company. Of course, Claire couldn't just leave quietly. She had to make sure that if anyone asked questions, I was the bad guy, the greedy husband trying to take advantage of an accident. Ray, I said quietly, I need you to help me with something. Over the next few days, with Ray's help, I started making calls. Not to lawyers or reporters, but to the guys who worked on that lift. I wanted to know the truth about what happened, and I wanted it documented. It turned out Ray had been right to slip me that internal memo. 3 other mechanics had reported problems with that same lift over the past 2 months. The grinding sound I'd heard wasn't new. It was getting worse, and management knew it. Tony Reeves, who worked the night shift, told me he'd written up a formal complaint about the lift 2 weeks before my accident. They told me they'd look into it, he said over the phone, but nothing happened. Sarah Chen from the maintenance department confirmed that parts for the lift had been on order for over a month, but the purchase was delayed because of budget considerations. I wrote everything down in a notebook, keeping careful records of who said what and when. I wasn't planning to sue anybody. I just needed to know that what happened to me wasn't my fault. After a week of Claire's abandonment and hearing rumors about my character, I needed something solid to hold on to. Mrs. Brooks noticed the change in me around day 10. I was sitting on my front porch, trying to get some fresh air and work my leg exercises, when she came over with a cup of coffee and that look that meant she had something important to say. You're planning something, she said, settling into the chair beside me. Just trying to get my life back together. Mm-hmm. She sipped her coffee and watched me struggle through the exercises the physical therapist had given me. That woman did you wrong, Marcus. But don't let her turn you into something you're not. I looked up at her. What do you mean? I mean, revenge is a poison that hurts the person carrying it more than the person it's meant for. You focus on getting better. Let the truth take care of itself. Mrs. Brooks was right, but it was hard to let go of the anger. Every day brought new humiliations. The first time I tried to go to the grocery store, using my wheelchair, I ran into Janet Morrison from Claire's social circle. She looked at me like I was something unfortunate that had wandered into her line of sight. Oh, Marcus, she said in that fake sweet voice rich women use when they want to seem caring. I heard about your situation. So sad. Have you thought about applying for disability benefits? Disability benefits. Like I was some charity case instead of a man who got hurt at work. I'm going to be fine, I said, but my voice came out weaker than I wanted. Of course you are, she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. Claire is being so strong about everything. Such a brave woman starting fresh. Starting fresh. Like our marriage had been some kind of mistake she was correcting. That night, I called Claire for the first time since she left. Her phone went straight to voicemail, but I left a message anyway. Claire, it's me. I know you don't want to talk, but we have things we need to figure out. The house, the bills, the divorce papers, if that's what you want. I'm not going to chase you, but we can't just pretend this marriage never happened. She never called back. 3 weeks after she left, the settlement offer came. Ray was with me when the claims adjuster called. The number was bigger than anything I'd ever imagined, enough to pay off the house, cover my medical bills, and still have money left over to start fresh somewhere new. But the offer came with conditions. I had to sign papers saying the accident was nobody's fault. No admission of wrongdoing from the company, no acknowledgement that they'd ignored safety reports, just a check and a promise to keep quiet. "What are you going to do?" Ray asked after the call ended. "I don't know. The money would change everything, but signing those papers feels like lying about what really happened. Maybe that's the price of moving on," Ray said quietly. That evening, Mrs. Brooks came over with dinner and found me sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the settlement papers. "Big decision?" she asked, setting a plate of meatloaf in front of me. "The biggest I've ever had to make." She sat down across from me and folded her hands. "You know, my husband went through something similar back in '92. Factory accident. Company offered him money to keep quiet about the safety violations they'd been ignoring." "What did he do?" "He took the money, said he had a family to think about, and fighting wouldn't bring his hand back." She paused, looking out the window. "He never regretted the money, but he always regretted staying quiet. Said it felt like letting them win." I stared at the papers until the words blurred together. The money would solve my immediate problems. But keeping quiet felt like betraying not just myself, but the next guy who might get hurt because nobody wanted to fix a broken lift. "I need to think about it," I said. "Course you do. Just remember, sometimes the right choice and the easy choice are two different things." While I was wrestling with the settlement decision, Claire made her choice clear. The divorce papers arrived on a Thursday, delivered by a courier who looked embarrassed to be bringing them. Claire wanted half of everything, including half of any settlement I might receive from the company. I called the number on the lawyer's letterhead. A crisp female voice answered, "Whitman, Caldwell and Associates. I need to speak to someone about divorce papers I received." "One moment, please." The lawyer who came on the line was polite but cold. "Mr. Reed, I'm Jennifer Whitman. I represent Mrs. Ashford Reed in this matter." Mrs. Ashford Reed. She'd already gone back to her maiden name in her mind. "I don't understand why she thinks she deserves half of a settlement from an accident that happened after she left me." Mrs. Ashford Reed's position is that marital assets accumulated during the marriage are subject to equitable distribution, regardless of timing. Legal words that meant Claire wanted to profit from the same injury that made her abandon me. "Can I talk to her directly?" "My client prefers to handle all communication through this office." Of course she did. Claire had always been good at putting barriers between herself and unpleasant realities. That weekend, I made my decision about the settlement. I called the claims adjuster back and accepted the offer, but with one condition. I wanted a separate meeting with company management to discuss the safety issues that led to my accident. "That's not typically how these settlements work, Mr. Reed." "Then maybe this settlement doesn't work for me." 3 days later, I found myself in a conference room at the bus depot, facing two executives and a lawyer. I was still using crutches, and my leg ached from the trip across town, but I needed them to see my face when I talked. "Mr. Reed," the lead executive said, "we appreciate your willingness to resolve this matter amicably." "I'm not here to be amicable," I said. "I'm here because 3 other people reported problems with that lift before it almost killed me, and I want to know what you're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else." The room went quiet. The lawyer started to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'll sign your papers and take your money, but I want a written promise that every hydraulic lift in this facility gets inspected and repaired within 60 days. And I want the safety reporting system changed so that when workers report problems, those problems get fixed instead of ignored." The executives exchanged glances. This wasn't what they'd expected from a guy they probably thought would just be grateful for the check. "We'll need to discuss this internally," one of them said. "Fine, but the offer expires in 2 weeks. After that, I start talking to reporters." I left that meeting feeling something I hadn't felt since the accident, like I had some control over my life again. The money was important, but knowing that I'd fought for the next guy who might face what I'd faced felt more important. Ray was waiting for me in the parking lot. How'd it go? Better than I expected. They're going to think about my demands. And if they say no, then I guess I learn how to fight with lawyers instead of bus parts. That evening, Mrs. Brooks came over to check on me. She found me on the couch, working through my physical therapy exercises with more energy than I'd shown in weeks. You look different, she said, settling into the chair across from me. Feel different too. Like maybe I'm not as broken as everyone thinks. Honey, you were never broken. Hurt, yes. Betrayed, absolutely. But not broken. She was right. Somewhere in the process of fighting for the settlement changes and standing up to Claire's lawyer, I'd started to remember who I was before the accident. Not just Claire's husband or the guy who got hurt at work, but Marcus Reed. Someone who fixed things when they were broken and stood up for what was right. The physical therapy was getting easier too. 3 times a week, I drove myself to a small clinic across town to work with Tasha Wynn, a physical therapist who treated me like a person instead of a problem to be solved. Your progress is impressive, Tasha said during one session, watching me work through the exercises that had seemed impossible just a month earlier. But I can see you're still carrying a lot of tension. Physical recovery is only part of the process. What do you mean? I mean, healing from trauma, whether it's physical or emotional, requires you to process what happened to you. You can't just push through it. She was talking about more than my leg, and we both knew it. Sometimes I think about that morning, I admitted. Wonder what would have happened if I'd refused to use that lift. And? And then I realize I can't change what happened. I can only decide what I do next. Tasha smiled. That's the difference between someone who recovers and someone who just gets by. You're choosing to recover. 6 weeks after Claire left, I got a call from her lawyer with a counteroffer on the divorce settlement. Claire would take a smaller percentage of the accident settlement in exchange for keeping the house. Why? I asked. My client feels it would be cleaner if you both moved on to separate living situations. Cleaner. Like our marriage was a mess that needed to be tidied up. But the offer made sense. I didn't need the big house with its expensive mortgage and memories of what I'd thought my life was going to be. And Claire didn't need the money as much as she needed to erase the inconvenient chapter of her life when she was married to a bus mechanic. Tell your client I accept with one condition. I want 60 days to find a new place and get moved out. That should be acceptable. After I hung up, I sat in the kitchen where Claire had told me she was leaving, and for the first time since the accident, I felt like I could breathe fully. The house had started to feel like a museum of my failures. Getting out would be a relief. Mrs. Brooks helped me look at apartments over the next few weeks. We found a small place across town, near the bus depot, with no stairs and enough space for me to set up a workshop in the garage. It was a third the size of the house I was leaving, but it felt like freedom. You sure about this? She asked as we sat in the apartment's small living room, paperwork spread across a folding table. More sure than I've been about anything in months. The settlement came through 2 weeks later. The company had agreed to all my safety demands along with the money. It wasn't about winning or losing anymore. It was about making sure that the next Marcus Reed wouldn't have to go through what I'd gone through. Ray helped me move on a Saturday in November. It was cold and gray, but I felt lighter than I had since the accident. As we loaded the last box into his truck, I looked back at the house where I'd thought I was building a life with Claire. Any regrets? Ray asked. About the house? No. About Claire? I paused, thinking about it. I regret that I didn't see who she really was before I married her, but I don't regret finding out. That night, in my new apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table and wrote in the notebook I'd been keeping since the accident. For the first time in months, I wasn't writing about doctor appointments or legal meetings or settlement negotiations. Instead, I wrote, Day 1 of whatever comes next. Outside my window, the city moved on with its business. People catching buses to work, going to dinner, living their lives. I was part of that again, not the broken man who'd been abandoned by his wife, but someone who was building something new from the pieces that were left. I thought about Claire sometimes, wondered if she ever thought about me, but those thoughts came less often now, and when they didn't hurt the way they used to. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. The difference was, I was learning to live with mine. Spring came early that year, and with it, a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in months. My new apartment sat on a quiet street, lined with old oak trees, and every morning I watched the world wake up through my kitchen window while I drank coffee and worked through my physical therapy exercises. It had been 4 months since Claire left, 3 months since I moved out of our house, and 2 months since the divorce was finalized. The paperwork was signed, the money was divided, and legally speaking, Claire Ashford Reed no longer existed in my life. But healing doesn't follow legal timelines. Tasha had been pushing me harder in physical therapy, and I was finally starting to see real progress. The limp was barely noticeable now, and I could walk for blocks without the sharp pain that had defined my world for so long. You're ready, she said during one session in March, watching me complete a series of exercises that would have been impossible just weeks before. Ready for what? Ready to go back to work. Modified duties at first, but you're ready. The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. I'd been living on settlement money and disability payments, but I missed the feeling of being useful. I missed the rhythm of honest work and the satisfaction of fixing things that were broken. Ray picked me up for my first day back. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp and clear, and I felt like I was going to my first day at a new job instead of returning to the place where my life had fallen apart. You sure about this? Ray asked as we pulled into the depot parking lot. No, I said honestly, but I'm going anyway. The garage looked exactly the same, but everything felt different. The guys I'd worked with for years seemed unsure how to act around me. Some were overly cheerful, like they were trying to make up for months of absence with enthusiasm. Others avoided eye contact, maybe feeling guilty about the rumors that had circulated while I was gone. Supervisor Jenkins approached as I signed in. Reed, good to have you back. We've got you starting light. Inspections, paperwork, no heavy lifting for now. That's fine, I said. I'm just glad to be here. The hydraulic lift where I'd been injured had been replaced with a newer model. There was a sign posted nearby listing new safety procedures, and I noticed that maintenance requests were now handled by a different department with faster response times. It felt strange to see those changes, proof that my accident had led to something positive, even if it came at a cost I wouldn't have chosen. During lunch, I sat with Ray and a few of the other guys. The conversation was awkward at first, dancing around topics they thought might be sensitive. Finally, Tony Reeves, the guy who'd written up the safety report before my accident, spoke up. Marcus, I want you to know what happened to you led to real changes around here. Not just the equipment, but the whole culture. Management actually listens when we report problems now. That's good, I said. That's what mattered. You could have just taken the money and disappeared. A lot of guys would have. I thought about that. Maybe. But this place is part of who I am. Walking away felt like giving up on myself. After work, I drove to the grocery store to pick up dinner. It was the same store where I'd run into Janet Morrison months ago, when she'd looked at me like a charity case. This time, I walked through the aisles with confidence. No wheelchair, no visible signs of the trauma I'd been through. At the checkout line, I heard a familiar voice behind me. Marcus? I turned to see Janet Morrison, perfectly dressed and perfectly surprised. Her eyes quickly scanned me from head to toe, taking in my steady posture and normal appearance. Janet, I said politely, how are you? I'm fine. You look, well, I feel well, I said, and meant it. She seemed to struggle for words. Are you working again? Started back today, actually. That's wonderful. I heard, well, there were concerns about your recovery. I knew exactly what she'd heard and from whom. I'm sure there were. The cashier finished ringing up my groceries, and I paid without any of the awkwardness I'd felt during my early recovery. No fumbling with my wallet, no struggling with bags, no visible reminder of the man Claire had left behind. Well, Janet said as I prepared to leave, I'm glad you're doing so well, really. Thank you, I said. Give my regards to your family. Driving home, I realized that encounter had been a test I hadn't known I was taking. 6 months ago, seeing Janet would have reminded me of everything I'd lost. Now, it reminded me of how far I'd come. The settlement money was still sitting mostly untouched in my savings account. I'd used some for medical bills and living expenses, but the bulk of it remained. Mrs. Brooks had been after me to do something nice for myself, but I wasn't sure what that looked like. You've been living like a monk, she said one evening over dinner. When's the last time you bought yourself something you wanted instead of something you needed? I don't really want anything, I said. Nonsense. Every man wants something. A new car, a vacation, a hobby. What did you dream about before all this happened? I thought about it. Before the accident, before Claire, before everything changed, what had I wanted? I used to think about opening my own shop, I said. Finally, nothing big, just a small place where I could work on cars instead of buses, be my own boss. Mrs. Brooks smiled. Now, that sounds like a dream worth chasing. That weekend, I drove around the city looking at commercial properties. Most were too big or too expensive, but I found a small garage space in an older part of town that made me stop and get out of the car. The building was nothing special, a two-bay garage with a small office attached, sitting between a diner and a laundromat. The for lease sign had a phone number written in fading marker. I called the number from my car. Henderson Properties, a gruff voice answered. I'm calling about the garage space on Maple Street. You want to look at it? If possible? Meet me there in 20 minutes. I'm Frank Henderson. Frank turned out to be a man in his 60s with calloused hands and a direct way of talking. He unlocked the garage and walked me through the space, pointing out the electrical setup and explaining that the previous tenant had left some equipment behind. What kind of work you planning to do? He asked. General automotive repair. Honest work for regular people. Frank nodded approvingly. Neighborhood could use that. Too many places trying to overcharge folks for simple fixes. The rent was reasonable, especially with the settlement money as a cushion, but starting a business felt like such a big step that I asked for a few days to think about it. Take your time, Frank said, but I'll tell you this. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare you a little. That evening, I called Ray to tell him about the garage space. You serious about this? He asked. I think so. It feels right, you know. What about the depot? You just got back. I'd keep working there part-time, at least until the shop got going. If it got going. Ray was quiet for a moment. You know what? I think it's a great idea. You've always been the best mechanic I know, and you deserve to build something for yourself. Monday morning, I called Frank Henderson back and told him I wanted the space. We met that afternoon to sign the lease, and as I wrote my name on the paperwork, I felt something click into place. For the first time since the accident, I was building towards something instead of just recovering from something. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of permits, insurance, and equipment shopping. I kept my job at the depot but cut back to part time hours, spending my free time getting the shop ready. Mrs. Brooks became my unofficial business advisor, helping me think through everything from pricing to customer service. Ray spent his weekends helping me organize tools and set up the workspace. "What are you going to call it?" Mrs. Brooks asked one Saturday, watching me paint over the previous tenant's faded sign. I'd been thinking about that for days. "Reed's Automotive," I said finally. "Simple and honest." "Perfect. Just like you." Say. Shop opened quietly on a Thursday in May. No grand opening, no advertising, just a simple open sign in the window, and my first customer, Mrs. Patterson from the apartment next to mine, whose car had been making a grinding noise for weeks. "I heard you were opening a shop," she said, pulling her old Civic into the bay. "Figured I'd give you a try." The grinding turned out to be worn brake pads, a simple fix that took less than an hour. When I quoted her the price, she looked surprised. "That's all?" "That's all it costs to fix brake pads," I said. "The place down the street wanted twice that much and said I needed a whole new brake system." "Your brake system is fine. You just needed new pads." She paid me with a smile and a promise to tell her friends. And she did. Within 2 weeks, I had a steady stream of customers, mostly referred by word of mouth. The work was satisfying in a way that my job at the depot had never been. These weren't massive city buses that would be back on the road regardless of what I did. These were people's cars, their way to get to work, to take their kids to school, to live their lives. Every repair mattered to someone. One afternoon in June, I was under the hood of a pickup truck when I heard expensive heels clicking across the concrete floor of my shop. I looked up to see a woman in a business suit standing uncertainly in the doorway. For a split second, my heart jumped, thinking it might be Claire. But it wasn't. It was someone else entirely, a young, professional looking woman with dark hair and nervous energy. "Are you Marcus?" she asked. "I am. What can I do for you?" "My name is Amy Chen. My car broke down about 2 blocks from here, and the tow truck driver said you might be able to help." Amy's car turned out to have a simple electrical problem that I fixed in about 30 minutes. But while I worked, we talked, and I learned that she was a nurse at the hospital downtown, working double shifts to pay off student loans. "What do I owe you?" she asked when I finished. I quoted her the standard rate, but she looked stricken. "I'm sorry. I don't have that much with me right now. Could I pay you on Friday when I get paid?" "Don't worry about it," I said. "Pay me when you can." "Are you sure? I don't want to take advantage." "You're not taking advantage. You're a nurse. You spend your days helping people. Consider this a professional courtesy." Amy's relief was obvious. "Thank you so much. I'll be back Friday. I promise." She was back Thursday, actually, with the full payment and a box of homemade cookies. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "Yes, I did. What you did for me, that was kindness. Real kindness. I wanted to return it somehow." After she left, I sat in my small office eating cookies and thinking about how different my life had become. 6 months ago, I'd been lying in a hospital bed, abandoned by my wife and questioning everything about who I was. Now, I had my own business, customers who trusted me, and the simple satisfaction of honest work done well. I thought about Claire sometimes, wondered what she was doing, whether she ever thought about me. But those thoughts came less often now, and when they did, they felt more like curiosity than pain. One evening in late June, Mrs. Brooks came by the shop as I was closing up. "You look happy," she observed, watching me secure the garage door. "I feel happy," I said, surprised to realize it was true. "Good. You deserve it." She paused. "You know, I saw Claire's mother at the grocery store yesterday." My stomach tightened slightly. "Oh?" She asked about you, seemed surprised when I told her you were doing well. What did you tell her? I told her you'd bounced back stronger than anyone expected, that you had your own business now and were thriving. Mrs. Brooks smiled. She didn't seem pleased by that information. I thought about that conversation as I drove home. Doris Ashford had probably expected me to disappear after the divorce, to fade away like an embarrassing memory her family could forget. Instead, I was building something real. That night, I sat on my small apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights and thinking about how far I'd come. The settlement money had given me options, but the choice to use those options productively, that had been mine. Tomorrow, I would go back to the shop, help more people with their cars, and continue building the life I was creating one day at a time. For the first time since the accident, I wasn't just surviving. I was living, and I was just getting started. By September, Reed's Automotive had become more than just a business. It was a cornerstone of the neighborhood. Word had spread about the honest mechanic who charged fair prices and treated his customers with respect. My small shop was booked solid most days, and I'd even hired a part-time helper, a young guy named David who reminded me of myself when I first started working with tools. The success felt surreal sometimes, not because I didn't deserve it, but because it was so different from the life I'd imagined when I was married to Claire. Back then, I'd been content to be the supportive husband, the steady provider working someone else's job while she built her empire. Now, I was building something of my own. Ray stopped by one afternoon while I was finishing up work on a customer's SUV. You seen this? He asked, holding up the local business journal. I wiped my hands on a rag and took the paper. There was a small article titled Small Business Spotlight, Reed's Automotive. The reporter had interviewed several customers, including Amy Chen, who was quoted saying I was the most honest mechanic in the city. How'd they find out about you? Ray asked. Amy set it up. She knows someone at the paper. I felt embarrassed by the attention, but pleased that my work was being recognized. It's good for business, I guess. What I didn't know was that the article would reach people I never intended it to reach. Mrs. Brooks came over for dinner that Sunday, as had become our tradition. She was quiet during the meal, which wasn't like her. Something on your mind? I asked. I ran into someone at church today, someone asking questions about you. My stomach tightened. What kind of questions? Ethan Caldwell, that man who worked with Claire. He wanted to know how you were doing, whether the business was really successful or just something you were trying to make work. Ethan Caldwell. I remembered him from Claire's work functions. Smooth, polished, the kind of man who treated service workers like furniture. He'd been hovering around Claire during the last year of our marriage, always finding reasons to work late with her. What did you tell him? I told him to mind his own business. Mrs. Brooks' eyes flashed. But Marcus, honey, I think they're watching you. Claire's people. I think they're trying to figure out what you're up to. That night, I couldn't sleep. Why would Claire's circle be asking about me? We'd been divorced for months. What did it matter to them how I was doing? The answer came the next morning in a phone call from Frank Henderson, my landlord. Marcus, you got a minute? Someone came by asking about your lease. What kind of someone? Lawyer type? Expensive suit, fancy car? Said he was representing potential investors interested in the property. My blood went cold. What did you tell him? I told him the property wasn't for sale and that I had a good tenant I wasn't looking to lose. But Marcus, this felt off. Nobody's been interested in this block for years and suddenly some high-dollar lawyer shows up? I thanked Frank and hung up, my mind racing. This wasn't coincidence. Claire or her family was making moves, trying to disrupt the life I'd built. 2 days later, I found out why. Ray called me early on a Wednesday morning. his voice tense. Marcus, you need to see something. Check the city's event calendar online. I pulled up the website on my phone. There it was. Annual Ashford Foundation Charity Gala, October 15th. A night of giving back to our community, featuring keynote speaker Claire Ashford Reed on overcoming life's challenges. Claire was going to speak about overcoming challenges, the same woman who'd abandoned me the moment I became one. You okay? Ray asked. I'm fine, I said, but I wasn't. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Claire was going to stand in front of the city's elite and talk about perseverance and strength, probably using our marriage as part of her story, the brave woman who overcame a difficult situation. That afternoon, Tasha stopped by the shop unexpectedly. We hadn't had a session in months, but she sometimes checked in on former patients. How are you doing, Marcus? She asked, watching me work. Good, really good. I heard about the newspaper article. That's wonderful. She paused. I also heard about the gala. I looked up, surprised. How did you... Amy Chen. She mentioned it when she came in for her physical therapy, said Claire's people had been asking questions about you around the hospital. The picture was becoming clearer. Claire wasn't just planning to speak at the gala, she was planning to control the narrative. If anyone asked about her ex-husband, she wanted to make sure they heard her version of events. You know what this is about, right? Tasha said gently. Tell me. She's scared. Your success threatens her story. When she left you, she needed you to stay broken to justify what she did. But you didn't stay broken. You built something better. That evening, I sat in my apartment thinking about what Tasha had said. For months, I'd been focused on my own healing and growth. I hadn't thought about how my recovery might affect Claire's narrative about our divorce. But now I understood. Every customer who praised my work, every article about my business, every sign that I was thriving, it all made her look worse for leaving me when I was down. Mrs. Brooks came over around 7, carrying a plate of cookies and wearing her serious expression. I've been thinking, she said, settling into my kitchen chair, about this gala situation. And I think you should go. I stared at her. What? I think you should go to that gala. Not to cause trouble, not to make a scene, but to show them who you are now. Mrs. Brooks, that's Claire's world. Those people barely tolerated me when I was married to her. Now, I'd just be the ex-husband crashing the party. No, honey. Now you'd be a successful business owner who belongs in that room just as much as anyone else. The idea terrified me, but over the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Why shouldn't I attend a public charity event? I was a tax-paying citizen, a business owner, someone who contributed to the community. And if Claire was going to tell her story, maybe it was time for people to see mine. Amy Chen helped me get tickets. As a nurse who'd worked with several board members' families, she had connections I didn't. When I told her what I was planning, she didn't try to talk me out of it. Just promise me you won't do anything you'll regret. She said, I promise. I'm not going there for revenge. I'm going there to exist. The gala was held at the Grand Meridian Hotel downtown, the kind of place where champagne cost more than most people's car payments. I bought a simple black suit, nothing flashy, just clean and well fitted. Ray offered to come with me for moral support, but I knew this was something I needed to do alone. On the night of the gala, I stood outside the hotel for 10 minutes, watching luxury cars drop off perfectly dressed guests. This had been my world once, peripherally. I'd attended events like this as Claire's plus one, always feeling slightly out of place among the old money and corporate power. But tonight felt different. Tonight, I wasn't Claire's husband or the guy who got hurt at work. Tonight, I was Marcus Reed, business owner, survivor, someone who'd built his own success. I walked through the hotel entrance with steady steps. The ballroom was exactly what I'd expected. crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, servers in bow ties carrying trays of expensive appetizers. The guest list was a who's who of the city's elite, people who moved money and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. I didn't recognize many faces, but several people recognized me. I could see the double takes, the whispered conversations behind champagne glasses. Isn't that Claire's ex-husband? What's he doing here? I found my assigned table in the back of the room and sat down quietly. The other guests at my table were polite but distant, a retired judge, a museum director, a couple who owned several downtown restaurants. They made small talk about the weather and the charity auction, but I could feel their curiosity about who I was and why I was there. Then I saw her. Claire entered the ballroom like she owned it, which in many ways she did. Her dress was stunning, deep blue silk that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Her hair was perfect, her smile was perfect, her arm was linked with Ethan Caldwell's like they'd been together for years instead of months. She looked exactly like the woman I'd fallen in love with, and nothing like the woman who'd abandoned me. Claire worked the room with practiced ease, greeting board members and major donors with the kind of warmth that made everyone feel important. She was in her element, commanding attention without seeming to try. I watched from my table, feeling strangely detached. This woman had been my wife. I'd loved her, planned a future with her, trusted her with my heart. Now she felt like a character from a movie I'd seen once. The dinner was good, salmon and roasted vegetables served by waiters who moved like dancers. I made conversation with my table mates, who gradually warmed to me when they learned I owned a local business. The retired judge was particularly interested in my work. "We need more honest mechanics in this city," he said. "I've been looking for someone trustworthy since my regular guy retired." I gave him my card, and he promised to stop by the shop the following week. After dinner, Claire took the stage for her keynote speech. She looked radiant under the spotlight, confident and composed as she approached the microphone. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying easily through the large room. "Thank you all for being here tonight to support the Ashford Foundation's mission of helping families overcome life's unexpected challenges." I felt my jaw clench. The irony was almost unbearable. Claire spoke eloquently about resilience, about the importance of supporting people when they're at their lowest point. She talked about how life could change in an instant, how tragedy could either break you or make you stronger. "Sometimes," she said, looking out over the audience, "we face situations that test everything we believe about ourselves. The question isn't whether we'll face these challenges, it's how we'll respond to them." She was good, really good. The audience was hanging on every word, nodding along with her message of hope and perseverance. "I've learned that true strength isn't about avoiding difficulties," Claire continued. "It's about having the courage to make hard choices, even when those choices hurt. Sometimes the kindest thing we can do is step back and allow people to find their own path to healing." I almost laughed out loud. She was rewriting history in real time, turning her abandonment into an act of noble sacrifice. But as she spoke, I noticed something. Her eyes kept scanning the audience, and when they found me sitting calmly at my table, she faltered for just a moment. Her voice caught slightly, and she had to pause to take a sip of water. She'd seen me, and for the first time since I'd entered the hotel, I smiled. Claire finished her speech to thunderous applause. She'd delivered exactly what the audience wanted to hear, a polished message about overcoming adversity that made them feel good about themselves and their privilege. As the evening moved into the auction portion of the event, I decided it was time to make my presence known. I walked to the bar and ordered a club soda, positioning myself where Claire would have to see me when she came down from the stage. I didn't have to wait long. Claire appeared at the bar about 5 minutes later, Ethan beside her looking like a proud boyfriend. She ordered a white wine and tried to ignore me, but I could feel the tension radiating from her body. "Hello, Claire," I said quietly. She turned slowly, her face a mask of composed surprise. Marcus, I didn't expect to see you here. It's a public charity event. I wanted to support a good cause. Of course. Her voice was carefully controlled. You look, well, I am well, I said simply. Ethan stepped closer, his territorial instincts kicking in. I'm sorry. Do we know each other? Ethan Caldwell, this is Marcus Reed, Claire said tightly. My ex-husband. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. This clearly wasn't how he'd imagined meeting me, if he'd imagined it at all. Nice to meet you, Ethan said, though his tone suggested otherwise. You too, I replied. Congratulations on the promotion, by the way. CFO suits you. The fact that I knew about his promotion clearly unsettled him. He'd probably expected me to be out of touch with their world, not someone who kept track of business news. Claire's phone buzzed and she glanced at it gratefully. I have to go speak with the auction committee. Marcus, it was good to see you doing well. Likewise, I said. As they walked away, I heard Ethan asking Claire, in a low voice, what's he doing here? I thought you said he was. I didn't hear her response, but I could imagine it. The rest of the evening passed peacefully. I bid on a few auction items, nothing extravagant, but enough to show I belonged in that room financially. I made connections with several business owners, exchanged cards, and had genuine conversations about the community and local business. When it came time for the valet to bring cars around, I noticed several people watching as a sleek BMW was brought to the front of the line. They seemed surprised when I stepped forward to claim it. Nice car, someone commented. Thank you, I said simply. As I drove home through the quiet city streets, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Peace. I'd faced my past, looked it in the eye, and discovered that it no longer had power over me. Claire had given her polished speech about overcoming challenges while standing next to her rebound boyfriend in her perfect dress. But I'd been the one actually living that message, quietly building a better life without fanfare or self-congratulation. The next morning, Mrs. Brooks called before I'd even finished my coffee. How did it go? She asked. Better than I expected. I didn't cause a scene, didn't say anything I regretted. I just existed in that space. Good. That's exactly what you should have done. Mrs. Brooks, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think I'm done now? Like, is this the end of whatever process I've been going through? She was quiet for a moment. Honey, healing isn't a destination. It's a way of traveling. But yes, I think you've arrived somewhere new, somewhere better. That afternoon, I was working in the shop when Amy Chen stopped by. I heard you went to the gala last night, she said, settling into the chair in my office. Word travels fast. My supervisor was there. She said you looked like you belonged. Did I? Amy studied my face. You. Tell me, how did it feel? I thought about the question. It felt like closure, but not the kind I expected. I thought seeing Claire again would hurt or make me angry. Instead, it just felt finished. That's good, right? That's very good. Over the next few days, I noticed increased interest in my business. Several new customers mentioned meeting me at the gala or hearing about my shop from someone who'd been there. The retired judge brought in his Mercedes for a tune-up and left with a glowing review of my work. But the most significant change was internal. I stopped checking Claire's social media. I stopped wondering what she was doing or whether she thought about me. The question of whether she regretted leaving me became irrelevant because I no longer regretted that she had. One evening in November, as I was closing up the shop, I noticed a familiar luxury SUV parked across the street. It had been there for about 10 minutes, and I could see someone sitting in the driver's seat. I finished securing the garage and walked to my car, moving slowly enough to give whoever was watching a good look. As I drove past the SUV, I saw Claire behind the wheel, staring straight ahead like she was trying to pretend she wasn't there. This happened 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. Claire would park across from my shop or my apartment, always at a distance, always trying to be discreet. She never approached, never tried to make contact. She just watched. Mrs. Brooks noticed too. That woman's been driving past your place every few days. Sometimes she slows down like she's thinking about stopping. But she doesn't stop. No, she doesn't stop. Good, I said, and meant it. On a cold December morning, as I was opening the shop for the day, I found an envelope tucked under my door. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Marcus, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed you to know that I understand what I lost. I hope you can find some happiness, even if it can't be with me. Claire. I read the note twice, then folded it and put it in my pocket. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not sadness. Just a quiet recognition that this chapter was finally, completely closed. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote my own note on plain paper. Claire, I have found happiness. I hope you find yours too. Marcus, I mailed it to her the next day, and that was the end of our story. Months passed. My business continued to grow. I hired another full-time mechanic and started thinking about expanding to a second location. Ray and I remained close friends. Mrs. Brooks continued to be my unofficial mother figure, always ready with advice and homemade dinners. I went on a few dates with women I met through customers or friends. Nothing serious developed, but I was open to the possibility of love again. The real kind this time, built on mutual respect and genuine partnership rather than convenience and appearances. One spring morning, almost 2 years after the accident that changed everything, I was working under the hood of a car when I heard familiar laughter outside my shop. Through the window, I saw a young couple walking down the street, clearly in love, planning their future together. They reminded me of Claire and me in the early days, when everything seemed possible and love felt like enough to overcome any obstacle. I used to think that time was a waste, a false start that led nowhere. But now I understood that even failed relationships teach us something valuable about ourselves, about what we really need, about the difference between the love that sustains and the love that simply satisfies. Claire had given me a gift, though not the one she'd intended. By leaving when life got difficult, she'd forced me to discover who I was without her. By abandoning me at my lowest point, she'd given me the chance to build something better from the ground up. I was grateful for that gift, even if I'd never thank her for it. As the sun set over the city that evening, I locked up my shop and drove home to my small apartment. It wasn't the grand life I'd once imagined, but it was mine. Every piece of it earned through honest work, built through difficult choices, sustained by real relationships with people who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide. And if Claire sometimes drove past, watching the life I'd built without her, that was her choice to make. I had my own life to live.